Welcome to Continuing Education Module, Business 101 for Wellness and Health Professionals, Understanding the Business Perspective. Our agenda for this module includes looking at Business 101 fundamentals, a concept called POSDECORB, which we'll explore more in depth in a moment, basic economic concepts that fuel business orientation, the economic perspective itself, and some economic concepts that are critical to wellness programming, and a summary of key points. When we look at Business 101 fundamentals, we're really essentially talking about a number of issues in terms of the perspective that one has when one is running a business or in a business. Businesses address a market need and fill a niche. So much of our thinking from a business perspective is, what is the need that I want to address in the market, and what niche do I want to fill in addressing that need? Another one of the fundamentals is most businesses provide either a service or a product. So the orientation is generally around those two things. I'm either providing a service or I'm providing a material product and shipping that product to a buyer. Usually businesses function as either B2B, which is business to business, they're selling to other businesses, or B2C, business to consumers. So that's usually the two ways in which we think about business enterprise. They all use, regardless of whether they're B2B or B2C, they all use production functions that require the use of resources of different kinds, mainly our labor, and that's oftentimes what we're focused on in our wellness activities, is improving the quality or capability of labor. Material goods, the energy that is necessary to purchase in order to complete the production function. Space, knowledge, governmental compliance, internet access, and capital. So those are oftentimes the categories of resources that are required to carry out a production function, which is what a business person thinks about in terms of the activity that they're engaged in. All businesses want to make money for their owners, and even if you're in a nonprofit situation or you're in a governmental situation, you want to be a good steward of the funds and the money which you are managing. So you still want to be able to do a good job at being able to handle those funds appropriately. And from the context of profit-making business, we want to be able to generate a profit for the owners, which may be a specific individual who owns a company. We call that a proprietorship, or a limited liability corporation, or a full corporation, a C corp or an S corp. So whatever our legal structure is, the business usually wants to make money for its owners. All businesses have primary and secondary markets. So when we're looking at business operation, the primary markets are the ones that we get most of our revenue from. We then can be creative at thinking about secondary markets, other markets that we can go into and sell our goods and services. All businesses are governed by the principles and concepts of economics. So economics is the study of the allocation of resources and their use, and we generally use those concepts and constructs and principles to govern our businesses. The management of a business enterprise requires POSDECORB, and we're going to go through what POSDECORB means in a moment. Now, the major functions of management are embraced in this concept called POSDECORB, which is really an acrostic. And the acrostic starts with a P, and that's for planning. So one of the main functions of management and business is planning out what they're going to be doing. The O in POSDECORB means organizing, and that's the arraying of resources to be able to complete and carry out the production function. And the production function will produce the services, or it will produce the products and goods and material goods that we end up providing to our markets. The S in POSDECORB stands for staffing. So that's another function, major function of management. The D in POSDECORB stands for directing, and that's where we are essentially ordering things. We are causing things to happen in a particular way. So again, this is a kind of that acrostic that covers the core functions of management. That's what helps us understand the business mind and how people operate in business environments. And the C stands for coordinating. So that is co-ordering different resources. So I'm making sure that the resources are coming together in an appropriate fashion. The second O in POSDECORB is operating, and that's where it's sometimes called controlling, but operating is carrying out the functions and making sure that nothing stands in the way or obstructs the production function that you're working with. And R is reporting. So reporting is where we are looking at the data that is produced by this production function, and we're using that data to do a better job of managing the process and or producing the items that we want to produce as a business. The B in POSDECORB is budgeting. And budgeting is essentially taking the financial resources, what's called the capital of a business, and identifying where it's coming from, what its cost to me is in using it, how I best can apply it or allocate it in the purchase of things to complete the production function that I want to carry out. And then the E is the evaluation. So what I'm doing as a general rule also in terms of major functions of management is I'm evaluating what's going on. And if you think about this POSDECORB, I believe it's been very helpful for me to be able to look at the core functions of management and think about how can we apply this to both the overall organization, but also how the wellness program is essentially managed and organized and operated. So these functions are key to any business enterprise. They also apply to a wellness program. So these end up being the major functions that I would pursue if I were managing a wellness program, and it had a budget, and it was an activity that was authorized by management to be part of what we were doing as an organization, as an entity. Now, all businesses essentially utilize economic concepts. So we're going to go into those economic concepts. If you have not had a macroeconomic course and or a microeconomic course, that's where you learn the economic concepts that tend to shape business response to various challenges that we run into when we're operating and organizing and setting up a business. The basic economic concepts that we'll go through are as follows. First of all, economy is the production, distribution, and exchange of goods and services. So here you see that goods and services popping up again. It's usually measured in terms of the money or capital which facilitates these activities. So our currency in different countries will drive our measurement of the capital that is involved in our business. So that's where we have different currencies across a global economy that have different implications for different businesses. Economics is the study of the economy. It's the study of all of the activity that's embraced in this larger kind of market and portion of our economic life and our country's life. And scarcity is the condition of not being able to have all the resources or goods and services that we want. So resources are always scarce. We always have limitations. Now sometimes those limitations can give us a surplus, so we might have extra. But in general, economics operates under the premise that all resources are scarce and need to be conserved rather than wasted. Markets are any setting in which buyers and sellers exchange goods and services, resources and currencies. So we oftentimes think about the demand and supply kinds of issues. We'll talk more about those, but in a market context, The buyer and seller is exchanging goods and services, oftentimes for the resources and currencies. So we're exchanging money to buy something. That's a market. The price is the value of a good or service stated in monetary terms. So we obviously are familiar with the pricing of various issues and various resources, services, and goods that we might be exchanging. Demand is considered the schedule, and that means the relationship of how much consumers are willing and able to buy at all possible prices during some time period. So when we think of demand from the economic context, we're thinking about how much are consumers willing to buy at different prices of a particular good or service that we want to provide. When we think about supply from the economic concept side, we're thinking about a schedule, a set of relationships about how much producers are willing and able to produce and sell at all possible prices during some time period. And we use, by the way, all possible prices because that enables us to look at the issue of the efficiency of demand and supply in a given market. So again, these are some of those basic economic concepts that operate in the business mind that allow us to be thinking about how we are delivering and going to deliver wellness to someone who thinks like this and has this kind of orientation. Some more basic economic concepts are, when we talk about a market economy, we're talking about an economic system where most goods and services are exchanged through private transactions by private households and businesses. Prices are determined by the buyers and sellers making exchanges in private markets. And the issue here of a market economy, which is what the U.S. and most of the developed nations of the world have, is it is a free exchange of people who have goods and services exchanging with other people who want to purchase those goods and services. Now that's at the opposite end from a communistic approach where you have what's called a command and control economy. It's ordered by bureaucrats that basically say we will produce this many widgets and this many items, and this is what the consumer will pay. That is a different situation than a free market or open market situation where we're letting private enterprise, people talking to other people to come up with those choices and set those prices and exchange goods and services. Now, the factors of production are the resources used by businesses to produce goods and services. And that comes together, the factors of production come together in what's called the production function. So we then can look at that in a specific industry or a specific sector of our economy. The costs of production are all resources used in producing goods and services for which owners receive payment. So that's how we are tracing. And oftentimes we think about healthcare cost as one of the costs of production. So when healthcare costs are going up at a high rate, it causes the employer and the business owner and the business mind to say, what can I do to keep those costs from going up so fast? Because they are putting pressure on my profitability, they're putting pressure on my resources that I have available to me, so therefore I have to come up with a solution to that. Equilibrium price is what an economist considers as the market clearing price at which the quantity demanded by buyers equals the quantity supplied by sellers. So if I am providing a market good into a specific market, and I sell all of what I have, and there's no one else that wants what I have, then that's called an equilibrium price. And that's what economists and business people look for in terms of the point at which the demand and supply are equivalent. The choice is when someone must make when faced with two or more alternative uses for a resource, also called an economic choice or a preference function. So preference function in economics essentially means it's the choice that I make to buy that good. When we go into the grocery store, we pick something off the shelf, we're making a preference function. And that preference function is expressing itself as me taking that particular item and putting it in my basket, going to the checkout, and then paying for it and taking it home. So I've exercised choice, and I've exercised a preference function from the economic vantage point. Now, non-market solutions are usually government actions or decisions that preempt the operation or supply of demand and supply and demand in a market. So when we talk about market solutions, it's using that market economy that you see at the top. When we're using the non-market solution, we essentially are talking about a rule or law or regulation that limits what choices people make. And in general, we attempt to get by in our economy with as few non-market solutions as possible, because most economists recognize that market economies and the exchange of goods and services in a market economy are much more efficient than a government-controlled economy. An example would be looking at the Russian society and seeing what kind of waste was produced when essentially bureaucrats were making decisions about how many goods and services would be produced in their economy. They had, again, what's called a command and control economy. It's not a very efficient way. There were lots of situations where people had to wait in line because there were shortages, because they didn't make enough of a particular item. So we tend to want to use a market economy because it's the most efficient at the regulation of supply and demand and providing choices for people to have and exercise in private markets. Some additional concepts are opportunity cost, the cost of the next best alternative that must be given up once a choice is made. So if I choose, this particular, going back to the grocery store example, if I choose a particular type of maybe pancake batter, then the other choices alongside of it I might not be able to make because I've chosen that particular pancake batter and I'm going to take that home with me. It's usually not all alternatives, just the next best choice. So opportunity cost is important to us because once we commit to a choice and pick up a good or service, we then have lost our opportunity cost for the exercise of that choice in another direction. Productivity is the ratio of output, the goods and services produced per unit of input, and that's the productive resources over a period of time. So we're thinking about how much of the output is achieved with whatever input. Now, labor is an input. Energy is an input. Space is an input. Those are the things that we're using as productive resources to produce the output that we end up considering as the goods and services that we are bringing to market. Investment in human resources are the activities that increase the skills, knowledge, or capability of workers or reduce their associated cost. And when we think about wellness, we're really thinking about helping reduce the future growth of health plan costs, sick leave absenteeism cost, workers' compensation costs, short-term and long-term disability costs, and presenteeism costs. Incentives are factors that motivate and influence the behavior of households and businesses. And prices, profits, and losses act as incentives for participants to take action in a market economy. So when we have a sale at a local store, that's an incentive for us to go in and buy the items that are in that store. So prices, profits, and losses are in fact do operate as incentives to affect people's choice in exercising the preference functions about their choices of various items and various issues. The cost of labor is the monetary cost associated with labor or employees, and that just means the salary and wage or the the salary cost and or wage cost, along with legally required benefits, along with other benefits that are provided by employers, and health plans fit in that particular context. So that becomes part of the monetary cost involved in the cost of labor. And then the last item on the page is the return on investment. And that's a measure of the net economic benefit to be derived from a defined activity. So when I'm thinking of the business mind and thinking about how business people think, one of the ways they think is, if I invest in a particular thing like a wellness program, what is likely to happen to those other expenses that I would otherwise be encountering? So that's the context around return on investment, and that's usually a percentage, and it just means if I'm investing $100 and I get $200 back, that's 100% return on investment. Okay, if I end up getting 200% back, that is going to be a 200% or twice the cost benefit of what I have invested my money in. So that's the way in which we generally think about return on investment from an economic perspective. The economic perspective simplified includes all resources are scarce. Economics is a study of the efficiency and effectiveness of resource allocation and use. So whenever we're allocating and using resources, that's where economics comes in. Economists work with the concept of utility, and economists are essentially saying, what is the utility to the individual consumer in buying that pancake batter? So that can be measured, and it's measured as you look at people making decisions, many people making decisions about what they're purchasing when they go to a store, for instance. So the economist is working with the concept of what gives utility or value to someone for them to engage in a preference function, purchase a good or service, and then for a particular price. And it is the interaction of supply and demand that is also used to help illustrate these concepts in a very quantitative way, so that we can actually work out the details. And that whole field is called microeconomics. A set of principles and axioms guide resource allocation. So virtually all of our approach to economic perspective deals with the reasonable person making reasonable choices. And a set of principles and axioms guide that resource allocation activity. We need to examine the production function and preference function. So production is the generating of the goods and services. Preference function is the user of those making decisions where they purchase those goods and services. Markets are where resource allocation and use take place. Financial management and analysis are key tools of economics. So we're using financial management principles, strategies, approaches, and analyst kinds of activities to determine how the economics of a particular business are in fact operating. We also want to maximize profitability as a primary goal of business. So when you're in business to make money, that making money is making money for yourself if you own the business, or for your shareholders if it's a publicly traded company, or if it's owned by private individuals, then we're essentially maximizing profitability through that business operation. And that's the general orientation that we're going to experience on the profit-making business side. But also on the nonprofit side, where we are not a governmental agency, but we're a nonprofit agency, or we're a governmental agency, we still are going to want to keep the demands of our choice of our things that we are using in our production function from using up all the resources. So if I have healthcare costs that are going up and I'm in a municipality or I'm in a nonprofit, I still have a desire to keep that increased healthcare cost from affecting adversely my economic decisions in my organization. Anything that prevents that ability to maximize profitability is considered a threat. And rapidly growing healthcare costs, increasing healthcare costs, have historically been a major threat to business, which has caused them to want to come up with solutions for that. So they go through plan design, they change carriers, they have larger deductibles, they change the mix of premium contribution amounts. So there's all these activities that are going on to help prevent the threat that is inherent in healthcare costs that are going up at a rapid or unacceptable level. Now, the economic concepts that are critical to wellness include employee health plan costs traditionally have increased at a very high rate. That's a threat to all employers. Therefore, a business person is concerned about that. Healthcare has major market imperfections. So we can't use what are called market-based approaches in healthcare because most people don't know what the cost of the service is that they're buying. They are not very good at judging the quality. They are not necessarily in a position to know what they need. And we have a lot of delay in getting new entrants into a market in a given area. So we don't build a hospital overnight. So we've got a lot of what are called structural imperfections, market imperfections in healthcare. And we are currently going through a shift from what's called a non-market approach to cost control in healthcare under Obamacare. And under the ACA, we are now shifting to move more toward market-based methods of controlling cost long-term. So that's changing the way in which we are perceiving and attempting to control and to affect this particular problem. Low levels of employee wellness have been shown to greatly increase all worker health-related costs. So as we think about health plan costs, sick leave absenteeism, workers' compensation, disability insurance, short and long-term, and presenteeism cost, we know from the epidemiologic literature that all of those the types of risk that are involved in wellness do in fact increase the spending in that area significantly. So we know that that's our base. Those worker-related costs include the 5 different costs that we just talked about. Wellness improvements have been shown to reduce all of these costs plus increase the overall productivity of each participating employee. So that's what our literature tells us about an effective wellness program. It is possible to track all of these with metrics, and the metrics can be used to determine the return on investment of the employee wellness program. So these are, again, economic concepts that have come out of the business context and are being applied to our pursuit of wellness programming for employees and their family members. As we think about the economic perspective of business, one of the important things for us to realize is that worker health costs are significant to the average business. And this particular data comes from the work of Ron Goetzel, a colleague friend that has done some of the most profound work for our field. And it's been updated with the Mercer Employer Survey results and then added to a major study done by Collins and his associates of Dow Chemicals, presenteeism-related cost. So the original article that Ron Goetzel did not include presenteeism. I put it into this, put the time periods together. Also had reduced the Collins amount by a 50% factor. So that 50%, the 19,000 per employee per year, is half of what they actually found. So the context here is that these particular costs, if we put them in current dollars or 2015 dollars, almost current dollars, that amounts to $13,000 of average health plan cost per employee, about $2,284 of sick leave, $873 of workers' comp costs, and approximately $1,444 on average of disability costs. And that, again, is the cost per employee per year of some of the major health-related costs that they encounter. The $19,000 cost is the presenteeism expense. And presenteeism is a little bit different in an economic sense because we basically give people salary and wage support. We provide benefits to them. We, in fact, then have a portion of that investment actually lost by the fact that when people come to work, they stay at work, and they may have an underlying health problem, they're not able to be as productive. So we don't actually attain or acquire the full productivity of the individual. And that's where that $19,347 cost comes in on average. All of these amount to a total of around $37,000 per employee per year. Now, again, these are multi-employer national data. This is the type of data we want on our own company. So instead of having national data, we really want to kind of achieve a collection of this type of information for our own population. And in doing that, the health plan costs are usually available from financial management. The costs related to sick leave oftentimes have to be derived by being able to look at the HR data and payroll data. The workers' comp cost usually comes out of financial because that's usually a transaction which is related to payroll. And the $1,444 as a disability, that's oftentimes also available through our financial management group. So those are costs we generally can actually find in most organizations. The presenteeism cost is harder to attain, and we frequently have to use either a standardized instrument for the collection of that amount, or we have to use something in a questionnaire that's a random sample of our population that is statistically significant. So there are methods that we use, and we cover those in the presenteeism continuing education module. So that 19,000 is actually derived and can be derived from a process, but it's not secondary to our own existing systems of data, what are called our secondary systems or secondary data. So the context here is that about $37,000 per employee per year is what the average company is spending on health-related issues for their own workforce, and that's a per individual. So if we end up having 100 people, then we're going to multiply 100 times 37,000 to get an idea of what the worker health costs, health-related costs are for our organization. In addition, we also have a good deal of epidemiologic evidence that has to do with the relationship between specific health behaviors, what are called clinical and behavioral risk factors, and their impact on all of these costs. And in general, the vast majority of health risk are going to increase all of these costs. And that increase is what we are oftentimes using from a business perspective to make the case for a wellness program that's specifically oriented toward reducing these costs. In addition to a significant amount of economic resources being related to worker health, we also have good evidence that wellness saves money for employers. And one of the better studies that's been done was a study that was done by 3 Harvard researchers, Catherine Backer, David Cutler, and Ziru Song. It was reported in the Health Affairs Journal, and its title is Workplace Wellness Programs Can Generate Savings. And the key phrase here is in the middle of this abstract, and it reads, in a critical meta-analysis of the literature. Now, meta-analysis, for those of you who are not familiar, it basically means a more sophisticated set of statistical tests that allow you to take the populations from multiple studies, put them into a new research population of combined numbers, and then run your hypotheses and tests on them. So it is a more sophisticated method for looking at the actual scientific data that's been generated in multiple studies. And so that, in a critical meta-analysis of the literature on costs and savings associated with such programs, we found that medical costs fall by about $3.27 for every dollar spent on wellness programs, and that absenteeism costs fall by about $2.73 for every dollar spent. Now, that combines into a cost-benefit ratio of 6.0, and that translates into an ROI of 600%. Now, what these researchers did was they put essentially 22 studies that examined wellness program impact on medical costs, and then they had another 22 studies. Some of them overlapped because they included both medical costs as well as sick leave absenteeism cost, but they used 22 studies on the absenteeism side and actually found this level of return. Now, this is a fairly high level of return. So we're talking about a 600% return on investment if we look at both medical costs and absenteeism cost. Much of our literature in the health promotion and wellness field is based on a single variant research. So it's only looking at one variable in terms of savings. So this looks at two variables. It looks at medical plan costs and sick leave absenteeism. So we have also about another 110 or so studies that have examined the economic return of wellness programs. And it's not that you can do wellness in any way and have it produce high amounts of economic return. They have to be done in a way that's going to maximize their economic return. And that means we have to select targets that are relevant to our economic goals, as well as the issues around how those targets would actually take place. Now let's look at a summary of key points for this module. First of all, business operates according to a set of economic principles and axioms, and we need to know those in order to speak the language and understand the values which guide our senior managers. Economics is the study of our economy at both the macro and micro levels. So the macro level is the larger system-wide national perspective and or state perspective. The micro is coming down to an individual product, an individual market segment, an individual subunit. Economics involves a perspective on the use of scarce resources. So we always make the assumption in economics that resources are scarce and need to be carefully conserved. Basic economic concepts are embedded throughout our society and particularly in our business community. So if we don't understand the economic concepts, we're not likely to know what to say and how to position our wellness efforts. The axioms and principles of economics guide all business activity, and low levels of employee wellness, meaning high levels of health risks and clinical and behavioral risk, lead to high worker health costs, including health plan costs, sick leave, absenteeism cost, workers' compensation cost, disability insurance costs, and presenteeism-related costs. Wellness programs have been shown to reduce all these costs if programs are well designed and carefully executed or implemented. All employers should use an economic perspective in addressing employee wellness. We consider the humanitarian balanced against the economic issues of wellness. Business principles, and specifically an economic perspective, should underpin all employer wellness efforts. And finally, business analytics and metrics should be used to continually evaluate the economic return from an employer wellness effort. Now, let's answer some key questions. Our first question is, why is an economic perspective important for worksite wellness practitioners? And because business leaders operate from this perspective, it means that without our understanding this, we're not likely to get the needed funding for our programs or the level of support that's necessary. If we can't speak their language and we can't address the issues that are influencing their choices, and we can't position wellness according to that, then we are at a significant disadvantage. We also need to understand their issues and speak their language in terms of the choices and the ways in which we talk about wellness. Question number 2 is, how would an economist look at the future economic value of a worksite wellness program? First of all, the economist would want to determine what are the appropriate cost variables or savings variables. Are we looking at all 5 of them? Are we looking at 1 or 2 of them? But we would want to know what our context is in terms of what costs we're examining. We also then want to know, what is the level of cost avoidance? How do I determine what would have happened had we not done the wellness program? Another perspective here about an economist would be multi-year, not just 1 year, but looking at multiple years. Another context is net of costs. So the idea is, how does the savings or cost avoidance actually come up in relation to the costs of conducting the program? Another one of the issues is the constant dollar analysis. Can we in fact look at dollars that are of equal value each year and looking at multiple year periods of time to assess the economic value of a wellness program? And finally, the economist that is well balanced is likely going to look at both economic and non-economic utility, which means that they are going to look at monetary issues, but they also need to look at what we call value on investment rather than just return on investment. And by looking at both return on investment and value on investment, we in fact are taking what's called a balanced scorecard approach from a business or management perspective. The third question is, why has a lot of employer wellness activity not produced the desired economic return? And the basic issues are oftentimes underfunding and under support of these programs, and leaving them in a more tactical rather than a strategic mode. And what ends up happening is the programs don't get designed very well, which means they don't select and focus on the right targets, prevention targets or behavioral targets, or the right interventions. And that is what we call a flawed execution. So those are the things that tend to actually cause the desired economic return not to occur. So that's the context for this issue around employer wellness activity not producing its expected or desired economic return. Now that you've completed this module, go ahead and take the quiz.